Good morning. The August 4th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19, the board continues to meet virtually. At this time, I'll ask Comptroller Henry for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections to the agenda. There are no protests for today's meeting. We have one item being withdrawn on page 41 through 42. Item number 1, Bureau of Procurement B50006139, Armed Security Guards, Metropolitan Protective Services Incorporated, has been withdrawn. On the following items are moved to the non-routine agenda on pages 47 through 48. Department of Audit's response to the biennial performance audit of the Baltimore Police Department for fiscal years ended June 30th, 2019 and June 30th, 2018. There are no items moved to the routine agenda. The following abstentions have been received by the board. On page 16, the Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on item number 1, Health Department ratification of agreement with the Johns Hopkins University, and on page 18, abstaining from items numbers 6 and 7, Health Department ratification of agreements with the Johns Hopkins University. On pages 37 to 38, the Honorable President Nick Mosby is abstaining on item number 10, Bureau of Procurement, contract number 08000, annual licensing and software support for Hightail Enterprise. There are no other abstentions, no votes, and no rejection of recommended awards.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now would like to direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated August the 2nd, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by the Comptroller. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve the items contained in the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The agenda items have been adopted. The first and only item, as noted by the Comptroller on our routine agenda today, can be found on pages 47 through 48. The Department of Audit's response to the biennial performance audit of Baltimore Police Department for fiscal years ended in June 30th, 2019 and June 30th, 2018. BPD has sent the board an update on their efforts to address certain repeat findings in the fiscal year 18-19 performance audit. The Department of Audits has also provided the board with some commentary based on their review of BPD's update. From BPD, we have Eric Malikon and Shala Graham. They will walk us through BPD's audit update. From the Department of Audits, we have, of course, Mr. Auditor Joshua Pash, as well as Dendi Monk. First, I'd like to recognize Mr. Malikon and Ms. Graham. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. Before I begin, I don't want to stand in front of the Comptroller or the City Auditor if they would like to begin by providing context to this request, and then the department.
Mr. Malikon, the floor is yours. I've yielded the floor to you. So if you could please walk us through the information that you provided us, and then we'll go to the Mr. Auditor, the Comptroller's office.
We all? Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Malikon. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And before I begin, I wanted to make sure I didn't stand in front of the Comptroller or the City Auditor if they wanted to provide context for the request.
Mr. Malikon, for the second time, I've heard you. At this point, the floor is yours. I know you provided us with some information. We would like you to cover that information first, and then we're going to turn to the auditor for the actual technicality associated with the audit.
Understood. I apologize.
No problem.
So part of this biennial audit is looking at our performance measures for the department that are established in our budget book. They looked at the FY19 budget book, and for us, we wanted to make sure, and we've been participating, providing information to the auditors on this request, from well into the beginning of this year about the status of where we are. We have been able to look at all of our performance metrics to ensure that they are properly aligned, and we are undergoing an effort right now to be able to ensure that the performance metrics we are providing to the council and providing to the city are in fact achievable and manageable, and that we can be held to account for them. Some of the metrics that were identified in this particular audit, in fact, we were trying to make sure we understood the context for them ourselves. We've actually taken proactive steps before the audit to actually update them and change them. Some of these metrics that were in this particular audit don't even appear in our FY22 budgeting. And so for us, we wanted to make sure that we did provide a process, and our Chief Financial Officer, Shala Graham, is here to kind of talk with us about what we've done so far in working with the Department of Audits to ensure that we can be compliant and be responsive. And again, this biennial audits happen every 2 years. And so last year, they looked at these metrics. This update that we provided showed status on where we are in implementing recommendations to address the findings. So I'll turn it over to Chief Graham.
Ms. Graham, unfortunately, you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, good morning, Honorable Mayor, Council President, and Comptroller. Thank you so much for having us today. I'd be happy to give you an overview. The main corrective action to this audit was really to look at all the measures and do a full evaluation of them, or what we're calling an overhaul of our performance measures. Since a lot of these measures were inherited, and we want to make sure that they are the correct measures, that we are showing how we're performing, and we show that the accountability and the transparency needed for the citizens. So we're calling it the Performance Overhaul Committee, and it is underway. The goal is to look at all KPIs across the department and consolidate if possible. And what we're talking about today are our outward-facing measures that are used to go with the budget, but we have a lot of internal measures that we use to hold ourselves accountable to. And then we're going to have our master performance measure policy. So the general concept of what the committee is going through and then documenting in policy is defining the mission and strategic performance objectives, analyzing all performance measures in alignment with those objectives, establishing a performance management framework, and establishing accountability for performance, developing a data collection plan, and then analyzing, reviewing, and reporting the performance data, and then obviously using the performance information to drive improvement. So that's really our comprehensive evaluation. And as we go through some of these recommendations from the auditor, we have addressed the ones that don't pertain to that massive overhaul. So we have documented where we can, the ones in particular job aids. We have changed the secondary employment rates for reimbursement to make sure that we are collecting what it costs us to staff those events. We've put some technology improvements in to make sure that there's unique user accounts. So we have addressed what we can address that's not part of this massive overhaul of our performance measures. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have about any findings or any particular recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. At this point, I would like to yield the floor over to our auditor, Mr. Pash, or Deputy Auditor, Ms. Mung, to talk to us about the technical findings associated with the performance audit, as well as provide any commentary associated with the corrective steps that BPD outlined in their statement to the board. So, Mr. Auditor or Ms. Deputy Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, and the members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Josh Pash. I'm the City Auditor. On July 21st, the board requested that the Police Commissioner and representatives of the Baltimore Police Department provide an update to the status of this biennial performance audit for fiscal years June 30th, 2019 and 2018. On July 28th, 2021, the Department's audits received the update on corrective actions. We reviewed the update to determine if it addresses the findings presented in the biennial performance audit. However, the Department of Audits did not audit the responses. As a result, the Department of Audits provides no assurance as to their accuracy or effectiveness. Basically, we reviewed the responses to see if they address the findings, but we did not have a time to actually audit the underlying data to verify accuracy. Of the 5 findings that were responded to, we noted that the first one did not address the finding in its aspect to evaluate the performance metric in context of objectives. And what the finding noted was that the performance metric was to capture the percentage of priority 1 calls for service dispatch to officers less than 60 seconds. And in 2017, the target was set as 90%, and then it was reduced to 15%, and then again reduced to 10%. And that was the reduction appeared to be to meet what was actually possible. So the recommendation and the finding was to set metrics that are achievable and realistic. And then for finding 2, we noted that the response addressed the finding. We did recommend, we noted that the policies and procedures submitted were tailored to ADP and E-time, and we did recommend that those get updated to address Workday. For finding 3, we noted that they had taken action for the reimbursement rates. For finding 4, we noted that they're still in progress, and as I said, we did not audit, so we did not do any further procedures on that. For finding 5, we noted that the response addressed the finding, and then we also noted that there was no addressing of prior audit findings and recommendations, as Mrs. Graham noted, pretty much all of those repeat findings or prior year findings related to how metrics are formed, how metrics are calculated, and how supporting documentation is retained. And if you have any questions, I would like to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. Just one question regarding finding number 1. I know you talked about ensuring that the metrics are achievable as well as realistic. And I believe in finding number 1, we went from maybe 90% down to 10%. Is that accurate? What data was used to come up with the 10%, and is that sufficient? I mean, at the end of the day, we shouldn't be setting key performance indicators based off of like what we're doing, because then we're not really trying to drive true effectiveness or efficiency and without whatever system or process that that particular number is supposed to analyze. So that seems a little concerning. So what was done to ensure that, one, it's best practice, maybe it's industry standard, maybe it's a national average or something? Like, what was done to put it from 90% down to 10%?
So what the audit determined was there was not documentation. All of these metrics and pretty much the targets had been inherited by the current management and were carried over from previous. And that was actually part of the finding, was to define policies and procedures and criteria to determine what that target should be. And as to answer your question, that I think would be best addressed by Mrs. Graham.
No, thank you, Mr. Auditor. Ms. Graham or Mr. Malakan, can you speak from a BPD perspective, the expectation on when that process is going to be developed and when the new metrics will be communicated?
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to do that. And this is exactly what we're looking at and why we wanted to take a comprehensive approach, so we can make sure we're using best practices. We're setting the right targets. Our goal is to have all of this completed so it's in the next budget cycle. So we've set the goal of having all of this completed by the end of October so that it can go in the next budget book for fiscal year 2023.
Got you. So real quick, is that the process, or is that the actual numbers that you expect to be ready? I guess if you're saying it's going to go in the budget, then you'll have the actual numbers in October, right?
Exactly. The whole
Gotcha.
process, the completion of the committee's goals and objectives, and then the new targets. And so everything would be updated in the budget book, as you stated.
Thank you. Mr. Malakan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. So in that particular standard, we would be leveraging exactly what you had mentioned, best practices, specifically from either The National Emergency Number Association, NINA, was probably a good standard for us to use on that. They help define what those durations should be and the percentage of times that are acceptable, and making sure that we have sufficient staff resources to be able to achieve those goals. And so that's exactly what we want to make sure is done throughout all of these KPIs, these performance metrics, and that's just one example.
And I guess the assumption is that this is going to be done across the board with all performance metrics, correct?
I can speak to BPD, but yes.
No, I'm saying, yeah,
yes.
I'm saying specific to BPD. Thank you. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members of the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finding number 2, Service 634, showing that the BPD was not able to provide supporting documentation for amounts collected from event organizers for special events. BPD formally reported that there are new standard operating procedures in place, and a dedicated staff person has been assigned specifically to manage special events accounts. Can either Mr. Melicon or Ms. Graham explain to the board how these new standard operating procedures address special events like Ravens games or Orioles games, as well as addressing smaller requests by private entities for security, like a neighborhood Walgreens or an individual small retail business?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, sir. So previously, it was the Department of Finance who was doing any form of reconciliation and making sure that, the revenue is being received by these entities. And we took it a step further and said, well, there needs to be, an additional check and additional control. So that's where we have a staff member partially assigned to making sure there's a reconciliation, so that we can validate that we're getting the revenue for our expenditures. And if not, then we can take corrective action of why did that revenue not come in? Why were we not paid for these services? So that's what we added.
So when the officers work these special events, they get paid through the city, and then hopefully the city gets reimbursed by charging the third party. So does that mean all these scenarios are or are not considered secondary employment for those officers?
Yeah, so the scenarios that you mentioned, the small entities hiring us for events, or the sporting events, yes, those, and then there's some internal events that are done within the city, and those are handled slightly differently.
But they're all considered secondary employment.
In the way we've used it in the past, yes.
What kind of limits does the police department put on the total number of hours that officers can spend in secondary employment?
So overall, we have a governing policy that requires officers to remain under 32 hours per week in any forms of overtime. That includes both secondary employment and any additional shifts that are picked up on a voluntary basis by members. So, picking up the Eastern District shift or Western District shift, for instance, we have to keep our officers, well rested. We don't want to overwork them. And so that is a policy concern. That was something the commissioner put into place back in July of 2019.
So secondary employment counts against the total amount of overtime that an officer can earn. Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Is there any benefit to contracting out the management of these special events? Like, could we try to get to a place where officers are just working for a third-party vendor and not for the city when they're providing security for these events?
In a word, yes, there could be a benefit for that. We are, in fact, exploring that as an option to be able to standardize and modernize these requests, be able to leverage technology for those requests. Overall, I think it's important for us to make sure that we're spending our time and energy in the right places.
Right.
And again, secondary employment tends to be just that, secondary. And so we want to make sure the department's focus is on its primary mission of keeping the city safe. But overall, this is a benefit that's afforded to our members, and we want to make sure that it's handled in a professional and organized fashion.
And just one last clarification on this part. If, say, a community festival or a block party, they close off the street, and so they're required to have police officers there as part of having the event happen. Right now, the way things work, if the community comes to the city and says, we need some police officers to do this, the police department is going to assign whatever officers are available for working those hours. And that could mean that, well, actually, I guess it kind of has to mean that they're going to be working overtime, because it's not going to be part of their shift to do this. So this secondary employment is going to almost certainly be overtime for them. That means that the community association is going to end up paying overtime rates for the officers when they reimburse the city, right?
Yes. So when we have our permitting process is engaged in that activity, we bill out at the rate that's authorized by the Board of Estimates. That rate was recently updated, and those special events are managed through that, rate that's authorized by the BOE. And so that's great.
But if the officers were really working for a third-party vendor and had just signed up to do secondary employment with someone, then they would just be paying whatever hourly rate the third-party vendor had contracted with officers to do.
Yeah, and that we would have to set that up through how we govern the agreement with the potential third-party administrator, but that's not outside the realm of possibility.
Okay. Kind of following up a little bit in finding number 3, as you know, the board approved new flat rates on April 27th of this year for special event coverage. How often is BPD planning on re-examining those rates?
So part of what we want to make sure of is, especially when our pay rates are adjusting through union negotiations and so forth. So the goal would be to look at it every time we agree to a new contract that would affect the underlying costs, which would be the hourly rates.
Okay. So looking at the fact that higher rates were adopted this spring, just at this point, just a couple months ago, and maybe this is more of a question for Ms. Graham, like how far into the year do you think we should get before we should check back in with you on how the revenue earned is matching up with these higher rates?
Yeah, I would be happy to send in a report at the end of the quarter if that would be helpful.
Okay. Actually, what I'll do is I'll have somebody here in our office check back with you, and we'll find out when the end of the quarter lines up with what board meeting, and we'll just invite you back for that. I think that's all the questions I have, unless no one else has any questions.
Any questions for you, Mr. Comptroller?
I have more, but I'm happy to pause if other people.
No, keep going, Mr. Comptroller.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Okay, so moving on to finding number 4, in the management response to this and this finding number 4 was percentage of recruits who successfully completed training with a grade of 85 or higher needs improvement. Can we talk a little bit about how many of the recruits successfully complete training with a grade of 85 or lower?
Okay, so that's again a great reason why we needed to look at all these metrics. We don't graduate people unless you get an 85. So that's an example of a metric where there was an additional metric that just said the percentage of trainees that completed or graduated the academy. This is an example of one of the metrics that we've already worked with BBMR to eliminate from the budget book. It doesn't exist anymore. We do, of course, want to carry a metric of the number of trainees that are passing through our academy. Academy washout rates should be measured and reflected against the national trends, and ensuring that we have a reasonable amount of folks that are making it through the academy and that we're not doing the wrong thing there. But yes, that was an example of a metric that while we want to be able to make sure we're tracking and having technology that helps us catalog and report out on the performance of our trainees in the academy, the metric itself was not useful.
Just out of curiosity, when you were working with the Budget Bureau on changing, or in this case, eliminating that metric, was anybody there able to offer any insight into why there had been this duplicative measurement?
Well, I think in the case of that particular measurement, a lot of our standards have changed in the past several years with the consent decree coming online, and the standards of the academy have changed as well. There may have been,
so there
may have
used
been
to
a
be
point-
people who graduated with less than an 85.
That is what we believe to be the case.
Okay.
And so again, because of the nature of how our operations have changed, we need to be able to change our metrics.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that makes sense. And then the final question I had, Mr. President, is for finding number 5, service 635. This finding relates to limiting access to training records so cadets can't alter their own scores. The department reported that this finding has been fully implemented. So what exactly did the BPD do to limit the possibility of manual manipulation or human error?
I'd be
Chief
happy
Graham.
to, yes, thank you. I'd be happy to answer that question. So previously there weren't individual user accounts. So now there's individual user accounts assigned to everybody so that every individual has their own separate account.
Okay, so that means, you mean, when you say everybody, you mean cadets, or do you mean the people working to monitor and record the cadets' scores?
The cadets, yes, the cadets themselves.
So part of that is by establishing individual accounts, we can then create the right permissions and ability to, edit or read only. That's how we're able to prevent a trainee from being able to have that full access that, let's say, an instructor could. And so by differentiating that into separate user accounts with the right permissions, we're able to fix that using technology.
Okay, all right. Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Melicon as well as Ms. Graham, we look forward to receiving your findings as well as the next steps in October associated with these really important metrics. Seeing there are no further questions or concerns from the board, we'll note the receipt of BPD's responses. Thank you, everyone, for the update. Thank you, Mr. Auditor, for always being prepared and ready to answer questions. Mr. Solicitor, I think I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, before we end, if it's all right with the council president, I'd like to introduce Chris Lundy, who has just started as head of EMBU. We're delighted to have him, a former member of the law department, now our chief, on a very important spot. I saw him on earlier, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
Mr. Lundy, can you hear us?
He's gone to do work.
I'm here, sir. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Well, the solicitor just gave you glowing remarks. Thank you for joining this team.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate all the kind words, and I look forward to working with you all in bettering the city. I'm really fortunate to be here and anxious to get started on all the great work.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Is there any additional announcements from any other members of the board? Questions, concerns, going once, going twice? As there's no new business at the desk before the board, we will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on Wednesday, August the 11th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, we love you.
Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. As part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings virtually. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0842939. Board of Estimates meetings are broadcast live on Charm TV, Channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at www.charmtvbaltimore.com. Members of the public can go to that website and click on the live stream link at the top of the homepage. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings virtually as the city continues to assess options for reopening City Hall and conducting public meetings in person. The board has received the following addenda for today. Department of Transportation solicitation number TR 21009, Citywide Cable Management JOC. Bids are due August 11th, 2021. Department of Public Works solicitation number WC 1284, Brewers Hill Neighborhood Water Main Replacements. Bids are due August 11th, 2021. Thank you.
I move that we note the addenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now proceed on to the first proposal, B50006120, procurement, creating and expanding tree pits. There is no bid bond for these bids. The first bid is from Monumental Paving and Excavating with a total bid of $659,200 and no cents. Ooh. Not sure if there's, I think that's the copy, but I'm just making sure that I actually have, okay. Do you have everything for the?
Looks like there are 3 copies.
Oh, okay, okay. Then the second bid is from Sparks Quality Fence Company with a total bid amount of $338,240 and no cents.
Is it?
That's,
This is for the tree pit?
yeah, creating and expanding tree pits.
Okay.
You got?
Yeah.
Okay.
The fence company.
They dig holes?
That's true.
All right, the second. Oh,
Oh, we have to move.
oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah, I move that we refer this to procurement for tabulation and report.
I second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the second proposal, Bureau of Procurement B50006147, Lead Risk Assessment Services. The first proposal is from, the first bid is from Modulus LLC with a total bid, of $1,151,250 and no cents. The second bid is from KCI Technologies with a total bid of $682,212.50. The third bid is from Arc Environmental LLC, and that is in the amount of $486,400 and no cents. The next bid is from Geo Environmental Services LLC in the amount of $613,500 and no cents. Okay. The next bid is from Atmos Solutions Incorporated in the amount of $994,837.50. And the final bid is from Bells and Bells LLC in the amount of $1,725,750 and no cents.
I move that we refer these to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The final proposal before us today is Bureau of Procurement B50006277, steel sub bases for light poles. All right. The first and only responding bid is from Aero Safety Device Company.
And I think it's just a unit price.
Is this a unit price?
Yeah.
Okay, so steel sub bases with 1-inch nuts are $585 each.
I'm
And
sorry, Bill, I'm Mr. Controller, I didn't catch that.
oh, I'm sorry. Steel sub bases with 1-inch nuts are $585 each. Steel sub bases with 5/8 of an inch nuts are also $585 each.
I move that we refer this to Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That is all the business we have before us, and so the Board of Estimates will stand in recess until next Wednesday, August 11th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.